Nia's silver tray stopped beside a contract worth more than the building she stood in. Candlelight fractured across Aurelia's crystal chandeliers, scattering gold over white linen, polished mahogany, and the dark glass towers beyond the windows. A string quartet murmured beneath the soft clink of champagne flutes. At the center table, Julian Mercer held a fountain pen above the acquisition agreement for 12 Harlem properties. His tailored black jacket lay smooth against the leather chair. Around him, investors watched the pen as if it were a judge's gavel. Nia Bennett set down a plate without disturbing the silverware. The porcelain was warm against her fingertips, but the room's conditioned air raised a chill along her arms. Her gaze settled on a paragraph beneath the redevelopment map. "Mr. Mercer," she said quietly, "you should not sign that tonight." The quartet continued for 2 measures before the nearest conversations faded. Julian looked first at the untouched plate, then at Nia. "Excuse me. The Harlem acquisition." Her voice remained level. "The ownership representations may not be valid." A man wearing a Mercer Crown lapel pin gave a dry laugh. Another guest lowered his champagne glass, leaving a crescent of condensation on the linen. Nia could feel the restaurant director watching from beside the brass service doors. She also knew what one complaint from this table could cost her. Still, she did not step back. Julian placed the pen beside the contract with deliberate care. "My attorneys reviewed every page. Then they should review the chain of title again." The warning landed harder than an accusation because she delivered it without drama. Julian's jaw tightened. Aurelia was where governors waited for reservations and executives measured their importance by which table they received. A waitress interrupting a 9-figure negotiation was not merely improper here. It was unthinkable. "Do you know what this transaction involves?" he asked. "Holmes," Nia replied. "I asked whether you understand the transaction." "I understand what happens when ownership records are treated like inconveniences." A few guests shifted in their chairs. The restaurant director took one step toward her, his shoes clicking sharply on the marble. Julian stopped him with 2 raised fingers, not to protect Nia, but to preserve control of his table. His eyes remained fixed on her face. "You were hired to serve dinner," he said, each word cold and precise. "Not to advise Mercer Crown." Nia's thumb pressed against the edge of her tray. The brushed metal bent the reflection of the candles into thin, trembling lines. "I'm advising you not to sign away something your company may not legally own." Laughter escaped from the far end of the table. Julian did not join it. That made his dismissal feel sharper. "You are a waitress," he said, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Nothing more at this table. Silence spread beneath the chandeliers. Nia's position, her wages, and every future reference from Aurelia now hung in the space between them. She did not plead. She did not defend her education, her right to speak, or the neighborhood reduced to blue blocks on his glossy map. Instead, she lowered the tray. From beneath a folded service cloth, she removed a heavy cream envelope sealed with black wax. The crest stamped into it, a crown divided by a vertical sword, was unmistakable. Mercer Crown. Julian's hand stopped halfway to his pen. Nia placed the envelope directly on the unsigned contract, with his family emblem facing him. "Then perhaps," she said, her eyes steady, "you should decide whether this belongs at your table." She lifted the tray and stepped back. Around them, no glass moved, no chair creaked, and even the quartet seemed suddenly too loud. Julian stared at the seal his company reserved for private correspondence, wondering how the woman he had just reduced to a uniform had obtained it. The room went silent. A champagne bubble broke against the rim of Julian's untouched glass, its tiny pop sharp beneath the quartet's fading strings. Candlelight slid across the black wax seal while cool air from the ceiling vents carried the scent of truffle butter and expensive perfume over the table. Julian did not touch the envelope. His gaze had moved to Nia's face. Without the polite half-smile she had worn while serving, something about her became familiar, not from a boardroom or a Mercer Crown briefing, but from a photograph framed by a cream-colored matchmaking profile. He reached for his phone, ignoring the expectant faces around him, and opened an encrypted message from 3 months earlier. The photograph loaded above a short biography: Nia Bennett, Columbia graduate, community advocate, current occupation, waitress. Beneath it sat his own reply, dictated between 2 investor calls and sent without a second thought. Not interested. Our lives would be incompatible. The screen's cold light sharpened the line of his jaw. Julian looked from the photograph to the woman standing several feet away. Nia Bennett. Her fingers tightened once around the edge of the silver tray. Then she set it on an empty service stand, freeing both hands before turning toward him. So you do remember. A shareholder beside Julian gave a brittle laugh. You know the waitress? Julian locked the phone and placed it face down. The sound against the mahogany was quiet, but every head turned. We were supposed to meet. No, Nia said. Her voice remained even. We were introduced. A meeting requires two people to show up. Heat rose beneath Julian's collar. He remembered declining before a restaurant had even been chosen. He had read one word, waitress, and decided the rest of her life could not belong beside his. I didn't realize it was you. That was the point of the photograph. No one laughed this time. The restaurant director advanced from the edge of the dining room, his shoes whispering over the carpet as his hand reached toward Nia's elbow. Julian raised one palm. Don't touch her. The director stopped. Nia's eyes shifted briefly to Julian, not with gratitude, but appraisal. She stepped forward on her own and rotated the envelope until the Mercer Crown emblem faced him squarely. By refusing to retreat, she changed the balance at the table. Julian was no longer questioning an employee. He was facing the woman he had already dismissed once without hearing her speak. What's inside, he asked. Something you should understand before your name goes on that contract. Then explain it. Nia glanced around the table at the guests who had smiled when he reduced her to a uniform. A fork-scraped porcelain. Beyond the windows, rain streaked the city lights into pale gold lines. Not here. Julian's expression hardened. You brought it here. I brought it to you, she replied. I did not bring it for them. One investor leaned back, insult flashing across his face, but Nia never looked away from Julian. If you want an explanation, Mr. Mercer, you can ask after everyone at this table understands that my uniform does not make my knowledge public property. The envelope remained unopened between them. Julian had rejected her first because he believed he knew what a waitress could offer him. Now she was rejecting his demand to perform on command, and the signatures waiting beside his hand suddenly depended on whether he could listen. Nia reached for her tray, then paused, her eyes dropping to one marked paragraph visible beneath the envelope. Before you decide whether I'm worth hearing, she said, read Clause 17 aloud. Julian looked down. For the first time that evening, the contract seemed more dangerous than the woman warning him about it. The room went silent. Read it, Julian, one shareholder said, his cuff link clicking against the mahogany table. Beyond the windows, Manhattan glittered beneath a black sky, while the scent of seared rosemary and expensive cologne hung in Aurelia's chilled air. Julian slid the cream envelope aside without breaking its wax seal. Clause 17 waited beneath it in dense black type. He read aloud, his voice controlled. Seller represents that all properties conveyed under this agreement are free of unresolved claims, occupancy interests, and defects in title. Buyer assumes sole liability for any claims discovered after closing. A few investors shifted in their leather chairs. Someone gave a dry laugh. Standard indemnity language. Nia set her tray on a brass service stand. The crystal stems touched with a faint, brittle chime. Not when the seller's representations expire at closing, she said. Paragraph 4. Julian's finger moved lower. The warmth left his expression by degrees. The seller guaranteed clean ownership only until the ink dried. Afterward, Mercer Crown would inherit every undisclosed dispute with no right to recover its losses. That transfers exposure, he said. All of it, Nia replied. She stepped closer, but did not reach for the contract. Now compare the property schedule with the consideration table. 12 buildings are listed. Only 11 have separate valuations. Julian turned 3 pages at once. Heavy paper rasped beneath his hand. The lead attorney leaned over, his chair dragging sharply across the marble floor. Property 12, a 6-story building on West 138th Street, appeared in the acquisition schedule but vanished from the pricing breakdown, bundled beneath the phrase ancillary holdings. Julian picked up his phone and called Mercer Crown's general counsel. Open the final Harlem acquisition file. Check Clause 17 against the seller's warranty period. Then verify whether Property 12 has a recorded valuation. Silence spread outward from the phone. Even the kitchen doors seemed to close more softly. Nia stood beneath the amber chandelier, her waitress uniform absorbing the light while diamonds flashed around the table. She had already crossed the boundary Julian had drawn around power, not by demanding entry, but by understanding the machinery better than the people seated inside it. The answer came through the speaker less than a minute later. The warranty terminates at closing, counsel said, and Property 12 has no independent valuation in the executed schedule. If there are unresolved ownership claims, Mercer Crown absorbs them without recourse. One shareholder lowered his pen. Another quietly shut his leather portfolio. Julian looked toward the investment team, whose signatures had filled every approval page. How did this clear review? No one answered. Air whispered through the ceiling vents, cold against the candle flames. The restaurant director moved toward Nia again, jaw rigid, but Julian raised one hand without looking at him. Stay where you are. Then Julian pulled the signature page toward himself. For a moment, the silver fountain pen hovered above the line carrying his name. He placed it down sideways. This closing is postponed, effective immediately. No funds move. No documents leave this room until Mercer Crown completes a new title and valuation review. Protest erupted around the table. Deadlines, market exposure, offended sellers. But Julian closed the contract with a single hard motion. The sound cracked through Aurelia like a judge's gavel. Millions of dollars stopped moving because the woman he had dismissed had seen what his experts had missed. His gaze returned to the sealed envelope. Clause 17 bought us time, he said. Now I want to know what that envelope is protecting us from. Nia's eyes remained steady. You should ask what it's protecting Harlem from. Across the table, the shareholders were no longer looking at her uniform. They were calculating what her knowledge might cost them. The soft scrape of a chair cut through the uproar, followed by the brittle clink of crystals settling against white linen. Beyond Aurelia's tall windows, rain silvered the Manhattan pavement. Inside, candle wax and expensive wine warmed the air around a table gone cold. The restaurant director stepped into Nia's path. Miss Bennett, come with me. His voice was polished enough for the guests, but two fingers pinched the edge of her service cloth as though he were removing a stain. Nia glanced once at the sealed envelope beside Julian's closed contract, then followed him toward the service station. Julian rose. Whatever you intend to say it here. The director's jaw tightened. This is an internal employment matter, Mr. Mercer. He turned to Nia and produced a folded payroll envelope. You disrupted a private event, embarrassed our VIP clients, and damaged Aurelia's reputation. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. A shareholder lowered his eyes. Another reached for his wine. The small sounds of silverware vanished until only the ventilation system hummed above them. Julian stepped away from the table. She prevented my company from signing a defective agreement. If Aurelia punishes her for that, I can settle the matter. No, Nia said. The word stopped him more cleanly than any raised voice could have. The director held out the envelope. Your final wages. Uniform deductions have already been calculated. Nia took it, opened the flap, and counted the bills beneath the amber light. The paper whispered between her fingers. She did not thank him. She did not look toward Julian for rescue. Instead, she reached for the brass nameplate pinned over her heart. The clasp resisted for a second before releasing with a faint metallic snap. Nia Bennett caught the candlelight in her palm. She placed it on the director's leather reservation book. Document that I was fired for identifying a financial risk your guests preferred not to hear. Color climbed above his collar. You were fired for forgetting your place. Nia folded the payroll envelope and slipped it into her pocket. No, I remembered it. Julian moved closer, the marble floor reflecting the hard line of his black shoes. I can have you reinstated before you reach the door. I can compensate you personally. Nia faced him then. The kitchen behind her breathed out heat, garlic, and scorched butter. Rain tapped steadily against the glass ahead. That is the problem with men who own everything, she said quietly. You mistake the ability to reverse a consequence for the right to decide what it means. His hand, already moving toward his phone, became still. Nia lifted the sealed Mercer Crown envelope from the contract. Whatever it contained remained hers to reveal. Tonight, you listened because losing money frightened you. I need to know what you do when listening costs you something. She walked through Aurelia beneath the pale chandeliers, past guests who parted without being asked. The revolving door carried in a blade of wet November air, then released her onto the rain-dark sidewalk. Julian could have ordered the director to call her back. He could have bought the restaurant before midnight. Instead, he stood beside the unsigned contract, staring at the brass nameplate she had left behind. For the first time, every instrument of power available to him was useless against a woman who had chosen the price of her own dignity. Outside, Nia disappeared into the moving umbrellas with Mercer Crown's sealed truth in her coat, and Julian still did not know where to find her. Rainwater shivered beneath the amber street lamps of Harlem, turning the pavement into long ribbons of black and gold. The air smelled of wet brick, roasted chestnuts, and exhaust from a city bus groaning away from the curb. By 9:40 the next evening, Julian Mercer had left his Maybach 6 blocks south and dismissed both his driver and security detail. No assistant had arranged the visit. No polished briefing waited in his hand. He walked alone, his cashmere coat darkening under the cold drizzle, following the only address he had managed to obtain from Aurelia's payroll records. It led him not to an apartment, but to a narrow storefront between a laundromat and a shuttered pharmacy. Bennett Community Legal Center was painted across the window in fading white letters. Inside, fluorescent tubes hummed above folding chairs and scarred wooden desks. Families waited with eviction notices tucked into plastic grocery bags. An elderly man held a rent ledger against his chest. A mother rocked a sleeping child beneath a poster that read, "Your home is not a line item." Julian stopped at the glass. Behind a plywood counter, Nia Bennett was pouring coffee into paper cups. She no longer wore Aurelia's black uniform. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows, and the cream Mercer Crown envelope lay beside a stack of property records, its black wax seal unbroken. Nia looked up. Her hand became still around the coffee pot. "You came without an audience." Julian stepped inside. Warm air carrying the bitter smell of burnt coffee met the rain on his coat. "You told me to prove I could listen. Listening starts after you stop being the most important person in the room." She placed a cup before the elderly man, then moved to a desk where a yellow legal pad held columns of handwritten figures. Julian watched her compare utility bills, tax assessments, and parcel numbers with the same precision that had frozen his acquisition at Aurelia. Near the wall, a donation jar contained $12 and some loose change. A red notice beside it showed the center's rent was 5 days overdue. "You work here?" he asked. "I run it." Nia turned the ledger toward a waiting tenant and marked a filing deadline. Aurelia paid for this place. Night shifts covered rent, printing, and emergency court fees. Until last night. The consequence landed without accusation. Julian removed his wet coat and draped it across an empty chair. "What does this center have to do with my acquisition?" Nia opened a file cabinet. Its metal drawer shrieked against the rails. She carried out 3 thick binders and set them before him, one after another, until the folding table bowed beneath their weight. Every spine bore the same designation, Mercer Crown Redevelopment Zone. "Your project calls these properties underused assets," she said. "The people in this room call them home." Julian opened the first binder. Lease histories, tax receipts, affidavits, photographs of brownstones his valuation report had reduced to parcel numbers. Nia crossed the room and unlocked the front door for 2 more residents seeking help, changing the night's work with a turn of her wrist rather than waiting for his permission. "I served dinner to keep this center alive," she said as they entered. "And this center has spent 18 months fighting the company whose table I was ordered not to speak at." Outside, rain tapped steadily against the window. Inside, Julian stared at the faces surrounding him, then at Mercer Crown's name stamped across every threatened address. Nia slid an intake form across the rough wood and placed a pen on top. "If you truly came to listen, sit down. The first family has court at 9 tomorrow morning." The fluorescent tubes above the Bennett Community Legal Center hummed as dawn pressed a pale stripe against the storefront glass. Cold coffee scented the cramped room. Warm pages slid from an aging printer and gathered beside stacks of tenant affidavits. After 3 hours of preparing the first family's court file, Julian placed his pen beside the completed intake form. "Let me fund this center," he said, "and I'll have Aurelia restore your position today." Nia closed the file between them. She did not touch the checkbook he had taken from his coat. Funding under whose terms? Julian's phone vibrated across the scarred wooden table. Mercer Crown's board chairman filled the screen, then vanished when Julian turned it face down. No terms. Your company does not spend money without buying something. Nia crossed to a steel cabinet and removed a thick document box. The cardboard rasped against the shelf. A grant from Mercer Crown would be announced as partnership. Partnership would become consultation. Consultation would become consent. And when families objected, your attorneys would say the community had already been heard. Then take the money anonymously and let you purchase silence without putting your name on the receipt. Her eyes stayed level. No, Nia carried the box to a flatbed scanner. One by one, she fed in rent rolls, relocation projections, school enrollment maps, and internal property schedules obtained through public filings and tenant discovery. The machine flashed white beneath each page. Julian watched numbers assemble on the monitor. 312 households marked for displacement, 87 rent-regulated units omitted from the public impact summary, and relocation estimates calculated at less than half the neighborhood's actual moving cost. These were not hidden clues waiting to be interpreted. They were families his own reports had made easy to ignore. If you release this now, he said, the board will say the center coordinated a campaign against Mercer Crown. The center did. Nia selected every file. The difference is that now we can prove why. The upload bar moved across the screen. Julian reached for his phone, not to stop her, but to call Mercer Crown's general counsel. Suspend every eviction notice connected to the acquisition. A pause crackled through the speaker. You no longer have unilateral authority over that transaction, counsel replied. The board convened an emergency vote 10 minutes ago. Nia pressed publish. The printer rattled behind her as reporters, housing advocates, and Mercer Crown shareholders received the same evidence at once. Julian's screen flooded with alerts. The board had removed him from acquisition oversight. His authorization codes were frozen. 3 directors publicly questioned his judgment, and the chairman demanded his immediate return downtown. Nia finally looked at the unsigned donation check. Keep it, she said. Money is the thing you risk when you still expect to remain in control. Julian tore the check in half. The sound was small against the ringing phones. What do you risk? Nia rested one hand on the sealed Mercer Crown envelope lying beside the scanner. Everything this company taught you not to see. Another message illuminated Julian's screen. Surrender all Harlem files by noon or face removal as chief executive. Beyond the glass, residents were beginning to gather beneath the gray morning sky, holding printed copies of Nia's disclosures. Inside, the board chairman called again. This time Julian answered. You have until noon, the chairman said. Choose the company, or choose her version of the truth. The line went dead. Nia kept her hand on the envelope. Julian had lost control of the deal. By noon, he might lose Mercer Crown itself. Rain tapped against the storefront glass while the old radiator clicked beneath a row of damp winter coats. Outside, signs bearing the number 312 lifted above the crowd. Inside, printer toner and burnt coffee thickened the cold morning air. Nia drew the sealed envelope toward her. Before you choose, she said, you need to know what Mercer Crown is asking you to bury. Julian set his phone face down. The board chairman's missed call glowed once, then vanished. Nia broke the black wax seal and removed 3 yellow documents, their edges soft with age. The first was a deed recorded 32 years earlier. The second carried Mercer Crown's embossed letterhead. The third was a notarized affidavit signed by Julian's father. Nia placed them beneath the desk lamp, where its amber light exposed faded ink and a red transfer stamp. Julian leaned closer. The property description named an entire Harlem block, including the building housing the legal center. The original owner was Ruth Bennett, Nia's grandmother. Mercer Crown acquired it after she died, Julian said. His voice sounded thin beneath the radiator's metallic knocking. No, Nia tapped the affidavit. Your father admitted the transfer was never completed. My grandmother rejected the payment because the valuation excluded occupied apartments. Mercer Crown took possession anyway, then buried her claim after closing. Julian read the signature twice. A handwritten instruction ran along the bottom margin. Do not submit for independent valuation. His thumb stopped over the initials beside it. They belonged to the company officer who had later become his father's chief advisor. Nia opened the final fold of the deed. A recorded succession clause named Ruth Bennett's lawful heir, followed by an updated probate certification. Her own full name appeared under the county seal, Nia Elise Bennett. not a consultant, not an activist hired to obstruct the acquisition. The waitress Julian had dismissed without meeting was the legal heir to the property Mercer Crown had hidden from its valuation, and the woman withstanding to challenge the foundation of the entire Harlem deal. A sharp knock struck the door. A courier in a navy raincoat entered carrying a rigid document case, water shining on his shoulders. "Miss Bennett." He offered Nia a receipt. "Certified originals from county archives." She signed, opened the case, and compared its raised seals with the copies. Then she handed Julian the originals instead of protecting them from him. "Now you know who I am," she said. "What you do with that cannot be blamed on ignorance." Julian's phone vibrated across the table. The board chairman's message filled the screen. 10 minutes. Surrender Bennett's claim and retain your position. Refuse, and removal proceedings begin immediately. Julian looked from his father's admission to Nia's steady hand. "Why give me the originals?" "Because if I file first, you can call this a dispute." Her eyes did not leave his. "If you release them, it becomes a confession." Beyond the glass, the crowd's low murmur swelled as more residents arrived. Julian gathered the documents, but Nia kept hold of the affidavit for one measured second. The paper tightened between them. Then she released it. The choice was no longer between a billionaire and a waitress. It was between the man Mercer Crown had made and the truth Nia Bennett had placed in his hands. His phone began counting down from 10 minutes. The countdown glowed against the cracked screen, each silent second colder than the dawn pressing against the storefront windows. Fluorescent lights hummed above folding tables crowded with tenant files, while outside, shoes scraped wet pavement and voices gathered behind the glass. Julian placed Ruth Bennett's affidavit beneath the document camera. Nia stood across from him, her palms resting on the scarred wooden table. She did not tell him what to choose. At 3 minutes, the Mercer Crown General Counsel appeared on Julian's laptop, framed by polished walnut and the pale Manhattan skyline. "Return the originals," the chairman said. "We contain the claim, preserve the acquisition, and discuss your judgment privately." Julian connected the laptop to the center's public livestream. There will be nothing private about it. He opened Mercer Crown's acquisition portal with his executive credentials. Red warnings stacked across the screen as he uploaded Ruth's affidavit, the suppressed valuation, and the county's certified ownership records. Then he sent the files to every director, shareholder, affected tenant, and news desk already requesting comment. Nia watched the transmission bar fill. Her eyes remained steady, but one finger pressed hard against the table's rough edge. Those documents established that Mercer Crown took possession without resolving Ruth Bennett's lawful claim. Julian said into the camera, "My father knew. The company buried it. I inherited the benefit and defended the project without demanding the truth." The chairman leaned closer. "Stop the broadcast." Julian opened the redevelopment controls. His authority had been restricted, but one power remained under his signature: emergency cancellation for defective title. He selected the Harlem acquisition, revoked the pending eviction actions, and terminated the compulsory redevelopment plan. The printer behind Nia awakened with a mechanical shutter, feeding out confirmation pages warm with toner. Outside, the crowd fell quiet enough for the radiator's metal ticking to reach the microphone. Julian signed the final order. It restored the disputed property to Ruth Bennett's estate and recognized Nia Elise Bennett as the lawful claimant, pending county recording. "This does not erase what Mercer Crown took," he said. "It returns what Mercer Crown never had the right to keep." The countdown reached 0. Julian's corporate access vanished. One by one, the portal windows turned gray, his executive email disconnected, and the Mercer Crown seal disappeared from the screen. The chairman's voice came through without static. "The board has voted. You are removed as chief executive and stripped of all acquisition authority, effective immediately." Julian closed the laptop. No bargaining. No appeal. The empire he had entered with a surname had expelled him with a single electronic chime. Nia crossed the room and lifted the printed cancellation order. The paper trembled faintly between her fingers, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of 312 households no longer facing removal. "You understood this would cost you Mercer Crown," she said. "Yes. And you released it anyway." Julian looked through the glass at the residents waiting beneath umbrellas in the silver morning. "Not for your forgiveness. Not for another meeting. Because your family should never have needed my permission to own what was already theirs. Nia placed the order beside Ruth's affidavit, aligning their edges with deliberate care. Outside, someone read the cancellation notice aloud. A cry rose, followed by applause that rolled through the storefront like thunder. Yet Nia did not join it. She studied the man standing without his title, his security, or the authority that had once made every table available to him. Then the county archives courier pushed through the door carrying a rigid blue case. Nia Bennett, he called. The county recording is complete. He held out the case containing the restored deed. Nia accepted it, but before opening the latches, she turned toward Julian. What remained between them could no longer be settled by power, money, or inherited names. The brass latches clicked open beneath the legal center's fluorescent lights, sharp and clean against the celebration outside. Cold morning air slipped through the doorway carrying the smell of rain, coffee, and wet pavement. Inside the blue case lay a cream-colored deed stamped with the county seal, its raised lettering catching the light beneath Nia's fingertips. She read the ownership line once, then again. Estate of Ruth Bennett. Lawful interest restored to Nia Bennett. The room quieted as Nia crossed to the scarred wooden desk where Ruth's affidavit rested. She placed the recorded deed beside it, pressed her palm over both documents, and closed her eyes for one measured breath. Julian remained near the wall, his phone dark in his hand. The tailored jacket that once announced his authority now creased at the shoulders. When you saw me carrying plates, Nia said, you decided you already knew who I was. Julian did not defend himself. I did, at the restaurant. Before that, on the matchmaking profile, you saw one word. Waitress. His voice barely crossed the room. Nia lifted the deed. That word was true. I worked nights because legal filings cost money. Because families needed someone awake when eviction notices arrived. Because my grandmother died before anyone with power admitted that her signature had never been given. She stepped toward the waiting residence and handed the document to an elderly tenant whose fingers trembled against its heavy paper. Read the name aloud. Ruth Bennett, he said. The name traveled through the room, repeated softly by people who had carried boxes, court dates, and unanswered letters for years. Nia had not concealed a glamorous identity beneath her uniform. She had been a waitress, an advocate, Ruth's lawful heir, and the woman holding together a community Julian's company had reduced to figures on an acquisition sheet. No single title contained her. Nia took the intake form she had given Julian earlier and set it before him again. You no longer have an executive office, she said. You cannot solve this with a check. But Mrs. Alvarez has a hearing tomorrow, and her evidence still needs indexing. Julian looked from the form to the folding tables crowded with leases and property records. Are you offering me a place here? I'm offering you work, Nia replied. Trust is not included. He removed his silver cuff links, rolled his sleeves above his wrists, and sat in the empty chair. Paper rasped beneath his hands as Nia showed him where to begin. When he misfiled a rent ledger, she corrected him without softness. When a resident asked his name, he answered without the word Mercer. By noon, sunlight had warmed the storefront glass, and the county deed hung in a plain frame above Ruth Bennett's old desk. Nia's Aurelia name tag rested beneath it, not as evidence of shame, but as proof that honest labor had financed resistance when inherited wealth financed silence. Julian paused at the door after the last family left. I rejected you before I knew you, he said. Nia locked the records cabinet and met his eyes. No, you rejected me because you thought my work made knowing me unnecessary. The truth landed without applause. Then she handed him tomorrow's case list. He accepted it with both hands. Nothing between them was promised except the chance to choose differently, one unglamorous act at a time. And that day, stripped of fortune's labels, he finally learned that dignity does not wait to be recognized before it becomes real.